Hello and welcome to Single Payer Radio. I'm Paul Hoppe, broadcasting from the Habron Building in Louisville on the WFMP 106.5 Forward Radio Community Network. Our programs air every Monday at 2 p.m., Tuesday at 7 a.m., and Wednesday at 11 a.m. And we also stream our show on SoundCloud. The show is a project of Kentuckians for Single Payer Health Care in conjunction with Physicians for a National Healthcare Program through its Kentucky chapter. We produce this program because we believe healthcare is a human right. We advocate for a national, not-for-profit, publicly funded, single-payer healthcare system for everyone. The views and opinions expressed on our show are those of the speakers and not the station. Today, I have Dr. Mike Flynn and Dr. Jean Shively with me in the studio, and they have some very special guests. And I'm going to turn this over to Mike and let him do the introductions.
Yeah, this is Michael Flynn, a retired surgical oncologist from the University of Louisville. Let me begin with the usual disclaimer. Any comments I make represent my personal views and do not represent the views of the Department of Surgery or the University of Louisville. Gene?
This is Eugene Shively. I'm a retired rural surgeon from Campbellsville, Kentucky. My comments do not reflect those of Taylor Regional Hospital or the University of Louisville Department of Surgery.
So our topic today is reproductive rights, and we have three very special guests that I will introduce in just a moment. And I want to make a comment about this, and then I will introduce each of the guests and give them each an opportunity to make whatever comments they'd like to make. So, since the U.S. Supreme Court, in its ideological wisdom, overturned Roe versus Wade, a number of states, including Kentucky, in their ideological wisdom, the legislatures have passed laws limiting access to abortion and creating a very difficult environment for the practice of obstetrics and gynecology, and we're going to discuss those issues today. So my three guests are Ona Marshall. Ona has an MBA and MA, is certified in radiology, nuclear medicine, and ultrasound technology, and is a founder of the Kentucky Reproductive Freedom Fund. And Ona, when you have your opportunity to make your comments, I would ask you to hopefully explain this to our listeners. Dr. Alecia Fields is an obstetrics and gynecologist who practices in Somerset, Kentucky. She's a fellow of Physicians for Reproductive Health and a board certified in complex family planning. Dr. Ernest Marshall, a board certified obstetric gynecologist and practiced in Kentucky for 42 years. And he was the founder of the EMW Women's Surgical Center in Louisville, provided abortion, contraceptives, family planning, and was a training facility for residents and students. So, Ernie, we're going to start with ladies first. Ona, we're going to give you the first opportunity to make whatever comments you'd like to make for as long as you'd like to make them, and then we'll let Alecia go, and then Dr. Marshall. So, Ona, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, and thank you for the opportunity to be on your program today. So I'll begin with a brief history and details of Kentucky's anti-abortion laws. Politicians in Frankfort have stripped Kentuckians of their freedom to make intimate health care decisions that they determine are best for themselves and best for their families. Kentuckians are facing multiple laws that lawmakers with no expertise have put in place to prevent them from accessing abortion. These laws are not supported by science or the leading health expert organizations in the United States. For 2 years, Kentucky now has had one of the most restrictive abortion bans in the country, with no exceptions, not for rape, not for incest, cancer patients, fetal abnormalities, even fatal fetal abnormalities that are incompatible with life. So this situation is an unthinkable extreme. In the 2024 legislative session, Kentucky politicians wouldn't support even modest exceptions to the law, which are the most basic of healthcare considerations. To receive abortion care that Kentuckians deserve in their own communities and state, they're forced to travel hundreds of miles out of state to seek the full spectrum of comprehensive, compassionate reproductive health care. For decades, politicians in Frankfurt have been hostile to women abortion providers, implementing a long-term strategy of quietly passing medically unnecessary and politically motivated laws that restrict access to abortion. Since 2011, there's been an onslaught of relentless legislation. So Kentucky has many anti-abortion laws on the books, including multiple criminal abortion bans. A few examples of these bans are the total trigger ban, which makes it a felony for anyone to provide an abortion to a pregnant person in Kentucky. In 2022, this was triggered into effect when the United States Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade, which provided almost 50 years of federal protections for abortion care. Kentucky's 6-week ban makes it a felony to provide an abortion when embryonic cardiac activity becomes detectable on an ultrasound. Lawmakers call this a heartbeat ban, but in reality, an ultrasound machine is simply amplifying electrical activity. So the language used is medically inaccurate and misleading. 6 weeks is very early in pregnancy when the chambers of the heart aren't developed and when most people don't even yet know they're pregnant. Kentucky's 15-week ban makes it a felony to provide an abortion when the probable gestational age of the pregnancy is 15 weeks or greater. So there are only 2 exceptions to these 3 laws: to prevent the pregnant person's death or to prevent serious risk of the substantial and irreversible impairment of a major bodily function. Due to the possibility of criminal charges for doctors, these are felony charges with jail time. Kentucky's abortion bans, they don't subject the pregnant person to criminal or other penalties. The criminal penalties are targeted at doctors. So doctors are looking over their shoulder, worrying about legal and political interference constantly. So politicians in Frankfurt have forced physicians to withhold or delay the accepted standard of care. And this is just a confusing and chilling climate for doctors. Lawyers, doctors, and hospitals have different interpretations of these laws, and women are hurt because of it. Politicians will say there are exceptions for the life of the mother, but providers know that the vague definition is complicated when they're practicing medicine. Hostile attorney generals and prosecutors with no medical expertise can disagree with their decision. And Kentucky's attorney generals and the supermajority Kentucky state legislature have made it clear they're hostile to abortion. I referenced 3 laws in Kentucky. However, when abortion was legal in Kentucky, Kentucky also has a web of other laws that would make restoring and providing safe and affordable abortion care difficult for patients and providers. Examples of these include tougher facility standards for clinics, in-person counseling requirement with a 24-hour delay before an abortion is permitted. There are restrictions on health insurance coverage of abortion in Kentucky, which means most people with private insurance have to pay out of pocket. And there are other laws and regulations that are designed to make it difficult or impossible for healthcare centers and doctors to provide abortion care. In addition to these laws to discourage doctors from providing care and speaking out against these extreme laws, Kentucky's elected officials pressure and intimidate providers and health centers. Examples include they threaten to withhold funding from universities. They retaliate against providers who file lawsuits to challenge these laws by engaging in dirty litigation tactics, such as seeking private financial information that isn't relevant to the cases, and more. One of our patients that had a master's of social work described the barriers and the requirements to listen to state mandated lies as political trauma. So immediately post Roe, abortion providers challenged the total in the 6-week ban, arguing they violate the Kentucky Constitution. However, the Kentucky Supreme Court, in an unprecedented decision, said that the abortion provider plaintiffs, despite being the individuals subject to criminal penalties under these laws, were not the right plaintiffs to bring the case. The court determined the patient must bring the case. So they're placing the burden on a pregnant Kentuckian to step up to become a patient plaintiff in a case. And they're asking a patient to do this at a difficult moment in their lives when they need to travel out of state to access care. This decision was a technical decision, not based on the merits of the case, and was in opposition to the lower court decision. It was in opposition to federal law to date and other states considering similar legal challenges. Also, this ruling is in spite of the fact that 3 months earlier, Kentucky voters rejected a ballot initiative to ban abortion in the state constitution. So Kentucky's lawmakers and the highest court are ignoring the will of the people. Since that decision to potentially abortion access in the state, the ACLU has been looking for a Kentuckian who's pregnant and seeking an abortion, who's willing to anonymously act as the plaintiff in a case. If you're currently pregnant in Kentucky and seeking an abortion and would like information on bringing a lawsuit in the state, to confidentially speak with an attorney, you can call or text this number, 617-297-7012. After working with the legal team to bring a lawsuit, you'll be able to leave the state for a legal abortion. So this web of relentless legislation has culminated in our current healthcare crisis, and it does more than just limit abortion. Abortion bans lead to a decrease in future doctors, and this isn't a hypothetical consideration. In a state already grappling with a shortage of healthcare workers, abortion restrictions worsen the situation for all Kentuckians seeking quality healthcare. In 2 recent studies by the Association of American Medical Colleges and the College of OBGYNs, they found nearly 60% of medical students are less likely to pursue residencies in states with abortion bans. And according to their research here in Kentucky, we've seen a 15% drop in residency applications overall across all specialties. In programs for OBGYNs, there was an even sharper decline of 23%. This year, the medical students at the University of Louisville conducted a survey of the 3 medical schools in Kentucky. And due to Kentucky's abortion bans, they found that many will opt for residencies out of state. And that percentage came to 73%. Almost 3/4 would consider completing their residency in a different state. So our medical students are being driven away from the communities that they love. They have to choose between receiving adequate training or staying in their home state and not receiving the comprehensive skills needed to provide the best care for their patients. And research shows that once they leave, they're unlikely to return. Also, most of these students are at an age they may consider having children, and they fear for their own health and safety. So in conclusion, Kentucky's restrictive abortion bans have far-reaching implications for public health, medical training, and the overall healthcare system.
All right, I want to thank you very much, and I would suggest at the end of the program you can make that announcement again about getting a candidate to the court. Dr. Fields, it's your turn. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks for having me. And as you can tell, just listening, I mean, the legal landscape and language is very confusing to an individual, much less a physician with graduate medical education. So kind of what that looks like on the ground is challenging, and it raises challenges for our patients as well as just for individual practitioners. So I'm a Kentuckian. I'm honored to serve my community and work in my home state. I did leave for residency to get abortion training and then chose to come back. As an OBGYN, I have the privilege of taking care of families and playing an important role in my own community to keep my patients healthy. But right now we're seeing how politicians and judges are dangerously inserting themselves into healthcare decisions. And the aftermath of the Dobbs decision has been really terrifying to witness here in our state. As a physician, I've been faced with decisions I never dreamed possible throughout my training, decisions that are not based on good medicine, but are driven by state law. So situations where I've been forced to sit by and wait until a patient becomes sick enough to intervene with basic necessary health care because of these laws, or forced to tell patients they have to travel and leave the state and delay their care. So we as Kentuckians all deserve much, much better, and we should be able to access healthcare that we need, whether that's birth control, abortion care, miscarriage care, pregnancy care, infertility care right here in our home state. And just like you heard a minute ago, beyond what these restrictions mean for our patients, we're also seeing how these restrictions impact the field of physicians that can practice and want to practice in our state. So, particularly as a provider in a rural area, the physician shortage is real, and recruiting doctors to come to these areas in Kentucky is even more challenging with these abortion restrictions. So many doctors, particularly young physicians, are choosing where to complete their training and where to start their practice. They view Kentucky and other states with abortion bans as undesirable places to live and even to practice. So they fear prosecution and what that could mean for their careers or their families. And we're already seeing doctors choose to leave these states, as well as new medical graduates actively avoiding these states for their training.
Well, thank you very much. Ernest, Dr. Marshall, you're next. The floor is yours.
Hello, everyone. I am Dr. Ernest Marshall, a board-certified obstetrician gynecologist. I am a native Louisvillian and went to medical school and did my residency training at the University of Louisville. I have been at the forefront of the fight to protect women's access to abortion and contraception for over 4 decades. I also provided comprehensive OBGYN care to the community for 42 years, which included delivering thousands of babies, providing gynecologic surgery, and rendering abortion care. For 42 years, our clinic provided care. We also trained medical students, residents, and practicing physicians. We furthermore acted as the plaintiff in all cases challenging Kentucky's restrictive legislation. Our all-volunteer nonprofit, the Kentucky Reproductive Freedom Fund, plays an integral role in our work, focusing on policy reform, advocacy, education, and providing a platform for physicians and medical professionals to raise their voices. There are only 2 exceptions to Kentucky's ban on abortions. The first is to prevent the pregnant person's death, and the second is to prevent serious risk of the substantial and irreversible impairment of a major bodily function. These 2 exceptions leave glaring holes in the doctor's ability to respond correctly and responsibly to medical emergencies. For example, and these are all conditions threatening a mother's life. Number 1 would be excessive bleeding. Doctors can't act to save a mother if one can detect a fetal heartbeat while the mother is hemorrhaging. A second would be an ectopic pregnancy. Doctors can't treat this serious condition if a heartbeat is detected, which makes no sense because the pregnancy is outside the uterus. A third condition would be a rupture of the bag of water prior to viability. This condition can lead to a fatal infection if not treated immediately. So these laws also prevent proper treatment of fetal conditions that are incompatible with life, forcing women to carry fetuses to term that are going to die shortly after birth. Some of these conditions are the following. Number one would be anencephaly, which is a fetus without a brain developing. A second would be lethal cardiac abnormalities or heart malformations that are incompatible with life. A third could be lethal chromosomal abnormalities. And a fourth example could be renal agenesis, which is the absence of the kidneys developing. So Kentucky legislatures have a history of not following medical science and not following medical organizations like the American College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists and the American Medical Association. Also, the Accreditation Council for Graduate Medical Education requires OBGYN residents in training to have access to abortion training. This is not available to residents training in Kentucky. So I hope the training programs in Kentucky don't lose their accreditation because of this. So residents in OBGYN will not be adequately trained to handle problems that arise in their everyday practice. Surgery procedures to handle excessive bleeding and premature rupture of the bag of water prior to viability are the same procedures as those used in performing an abortion. Also, residents at our clinic received extensive ultrasound training. They were so appreciative of this training because it was more extensive than offered in their residency program. The residents became more competent in ultrasound and were better doctors because of this. Kentucky legislatures have passed laws to force doctors to tell outright lies to patients. One example is that doctors were forced to tell medical abortion patients that the pill's effect could be reversed if they changed their mind. Studies have shown that this effort was harmful to patients. Also, this effort is not supported by science or the leading medical associations like the American College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists. Legislatures also make false statements like fetuses can feel pain in the second trimester when we know that the neural pathways for pain don't develop until much later in pregnancy. So every woman, every couple, every family should have the right to determine how many children they want. Every woman should have the right to make decisions so that she can have her best life. As we now see, government interference in healthcare decisions are placing women's lives and future fertility in danger. Doctors should be able to make medical decisions without the fear of prosecution and jail time. We, as Kentuckians, need to change the current legislative environment. It is time to step up and vote for legislators and judges who respect the rights of women to control their reproduction. Thank you.
Ernest, thank you all. Gene, you want to begin the conversation?
This was certainly a very interesting start of our program. I would like to give the audience a little idea what goes on in rural Kentucky and probably in urban Kentucky on how you deal with a life-threatening situation for a mother. Dr. Fields, I want to ask you a couple of situations. What do you do if a lady comes in near the, let's say, the end of the first trimester with an incomplete miscarriage, and on ultrasound it's interpreted that the baby has a heartbeat? So you're in Somerset, Kentucky. How do you take care of that patient? What do you do? And then the second scenarios, what do you do with patients in the second trimester with ruptured membranes? How do you deal with that patient, and what are you forced to do?
Sure. Yeah, I've had both of these situations come up, and the way that I manage them post-jobs is very different than the way that I would have managed them prior to the the laws changing, and even different than I would in a different state. So I often have to have a very candid conversation with my patient about the fact that they have a pregnancy that has a heartbeat, and in the state of Kentucky, intervening would be a felony. And there then becomes this very challenging dilemma of when does it become life-threatening. And so in these situations, I've had to go up the chain and ask hospital administrators to determine at what point of blood loss or hemoglobin, or when I'm transfusing a patient, is considered life-threatening enough to intervene. Or if they're stable enough, I've told patients that their other option is to leave and go to a different state, which is heartbreaking to not be able to care for patients using my skills and the standard of care
So what
that could
state?
save their life.
What state do you usually have to send them to?
Well, that's challenging too, because the landscape is changing so quickly. Right now, Indiana can intervene in the situation of premature rupture of membranes if it's in second trimester. So I've had patients that have pursued traveling to Indiana, where they can be cared for there.
Well,
it also depends where in the state you're living and what proximity you're willing to travel to, if they can travel at all.
let me make a comment about that, and then I want to ask each of you to respond. Now, what I'm hearing is that the laws of Kentucky require that obstetricians, gynecologists, dealing with complications of pregnancy, whether it's an abortion or a miscarriage with ruptured membranes or bleeding or some fetal anomalies that are not life-sustaining, that they are required to commit medical malpractice. Now, and what I've wondered about this is there some way that, because I mean, you can get sued for doing medical malpractice from a surgical standpoint, other standpoints. Has anyone thought about, actually suing? I mean, again, I don't know. Maybe this is not. They've got situational immunity because they're legislature, but suing the state regarding the laws because it is promoting medical malpractice. So let's just start. Una, Dr. Fields, and Dr. Marshall. Let's do it. Each of you comment about that, and then we can move on to whatever the next question is.
So I don't know if that's been considered at all. As Ernest and EMW acting as the plaintiff for over 4 decades in all the cases in Kentucky, I haven't heard it discussed. And so that's something that I'm not able to answer. However, I would just remind people that since the Kentucky State Legislature and the Attorney Generals in Kentucky are very hostile to abortion, that we don't know. They can disagree with a medical decision. So it just leaves doctors and healthcare providers in a situation where they're constantly worrying, looking over their shoulder, that hospitals and the lawyers for a particular hospital, a particular practice, they are sort of left making their own decisions about the amount of risk that they'll accept.
Dr. Fields?
Yeah, there are kind of cases similar to that have been brought forward in Texas where patients have become septic and very ill and risk their future fertility even because of the restrictions. I think the risk that physicians have to play and the gambling game of what will my career look like, and am I where do you go? You know, especially as a physician starting out new in my career with lots of student loans and a family that depends on me. It doesn't do my community any good if I can't practice anymore either. So, you know, we all try to do the best in for our patients, but you also have to stick by the laws that are in your state.
Ernest?
Yeah. The question is, do medical malpractice situations trump the legal system? And right now, it doesn't. The judges and even the appellate courts and obviously the Supreme Court are on the side of these abortion laws. So anything going contrary or contradicting these things probably has they have little chance of going anywhere in the court system the way it's set up today.
Wow, what a scary situation. Gee.
Again, I want to get back to some practical things. Dr. Fields, if you get called into the emergency room in Somerset tonight with a tubal pregnancy that has a hemoglobin of 6, and for our audience, that's a very low blood count. It means the patient could bleed to death. So what do? You're in a really you're in a situation that it's really unsolvable. So, but we as surgeons, we have to do something, and we can't let a mother die with a situation like that. So what do you do?
Yeah, it does feel a little lose-lose, but I mean, in that situation, I got okay from my hospital that if you're to a point where you're transfusing a patient, their risk to their life is significant. So, you know, I'm also in a regional hospital. I have access to blood, fortunately, but not necessarily enough blood for a massive transfusion. And so intervening in a timely manner is also really important to save that patient's life. So those are situations you don't have time to transfer them to an out of state.
So you go ahead and you give them blood and go ahead and do a surgery and take out the tube?
Right.
Okay.
Well, with the issues related to training and the lack of interest in recently trained graduates in obstetrics and gynecology coming into the state of Kentucky, and the prospect of people working here like you, Dr. Fields, who maybe earlier on in their career decide it's about time to go somewhere else where you don't have to practice medical malpractice. It sounds to me like we're heading in the same direction as Idaho and becoming a maternity desert. Again, I'd ask each of you to make, would you agree with that, not agree with that, or what are your thoughts about that comment?
Well, Kentucky already has a significant number of counties without obstetrical care. And I think it gets worse as time goes on, as the smaller hospitals aren't equipped to handle a lot of obstetric emergencies. So they have to get out of the obstetrical business, and patients have to travel further and further distances to get obstetrical care in Kentucky.
Well, I guess the question I have is much of the issues and the supermajority in the legislature is a result of gerrymandering and redistricting. And maybe, Dr. Fields, you're the best person to answer this. Who are your patients voting for? Because if all these people are in the legislature and they're, you know, I ask Gene the same question all the time. You know, is this something that just doesn't get into their heads when they're going to the voting booth, or do you have some thoughts about that? And I'd ask Ona and Ernest as well, what your thoughts are.
I have a lot of thoughts about that. There is a huge disconnect in patients' knowledge of how legislative decisions affects their health care. I had just numerous patients come to our clinic seeking health care, and they don't really understand how important it is to vote and to vote for legislatures that are interested in their reproductive rights. There's just a huge disconnect. And even when they need the services, they don't realize that they really need to get out there and vote to protect their rights. It's just a huge disconnect.
Dr. Fields, you're out there in Somerset. Your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think when you see on the ballot, like we did in Kentuckians, even in rural Kentucky, vote, they don't want politicians making these decisions for them. We've seen that people go to the polls and vote that, and they don't want politicians making these decisions for them. But yes, the huge disconnect in terms of how laws get made, and state elections, especially local elections, are incredibly important. And we often pay attention to these national elections, but local state elections are often just as important in a lot of laws.
Well, go ahead.
It is to but also just the disconnect among our makers is pretty impressive. Just the amount of about care and women's bodies and what is a very making sure that our health.
For the life of me, I don't understand, because there was a referendum a couple of years ago that would have made an abortion part of the constitution of the state, and that was defeated by 60% of the voters. But at the same time, they are putting these same politicians in office that are passing the contrary laws. And again, I'm sort of banging my head against a wall trying to understand how this disconnect works. Gene, do you have some thoughts about? Yeah, you're down in Campbellsville, so help me out here.
Well, first I want to ask Dr. Fields, have you talked to Hal Rogers about this issue?
No, do you want to go with me?
I'd be glad to. I don't know Hal, but I know some people from Somerset who know him real well, and I know where he lives. Yeah, he's extremely popular in Eastern Kentucky, and I think he would listen, but I don't think he's not going to lose his popularity. He's probably one of the most popular representatives in the United States, and has been in very powerful positions. At one time, he was chairman of the Ways and Means Committee. But I would be glad to talk to you, particularly about the issues of the risk of women's health. And I know some other people who would be interested in talking to him.
And now, Jane, tell again. I'd like to get your comments about the issue of the disconnect that we've all talked about, and what's going on in the heads of people who are suffering from these issues, but yet and who vote against incorporating abortion in the state constitution, but still there's a supermajority of anti-abortion ideologues in the legislature.
Well, I think most people in the state of Kentucky are opposed to abortion, but they don't realize the problem of having a law written the way it is. It creates the big problems with the health of the mother, and all they see it is black and white. And so that's the biggest issue in the presidential election. The number one reasons that evangelical Christians have backed Trump is because of the issue of abortion. I understand, though, that's beginning to change a little bit particularly with some of the things that Trump has said lately. But the main issue is abortion, particularly in rural Kentucky and evangelical Christians, but they don't understand the problems. And then so I want to ask a question. Is there a way that we can get some compromise in this? For example, could we say that it's okay to have abortion up to a certain age, and on the other side, where it's not a felony to take care of a pregnancy that has a baby that's incompatible with life, or take care of a complication of pregnancy like a second trimester ruptured membrane. Is there any way, do you think there's any way in the current climate that we could come up with some compromise?
Well, I think this issue has been going on for over 50 years, and there hasn't been able to be a compromise. I think that when you have fanatics and zealots on one side who want to save any zygote or any blastocyst that has a potential life, whether it's going to kill the mother or whatever, it's really hard to come up with a compromise.
Okay. And I have another question. What's going on with in vitro fertilization in Kentucky?
So I'll start with that, make a comment on that, and then pass it on to the doctors. But what I can tell you that with in vitro fertilization, when the Alabama law was passed and what happened there, there were three bills that were written to come before the Kentucky State Legislature, and they didn't go anywhere. So they were not heard in committee, and they didn't get any attention at all.
Who's next?
Well, let me just rephrase that question. Can you get in vitro fertilization in Kentucky now? And the second question is, what's going on with those embryos that are frozen and being kept? What's the status of those?
As of right now, IVF is still available in the state of Kentucky. But we know that anti-abortion judges and politicians have attempted to restrict access in other states, and that can happen here, even though it didn't this year. And it doesn't change the fact that people still need access to a full spectrum of care, and that includes fertility care and abortion care and pregnancy care.
Ernest?
Yeah, I think we have to be real careful if we give personhood to embryos. That's going to really wipe out IVF centers all over the country. And it's going to hurt families suffering with infertility, which is a catastrophe.
So what's going on with the current embryos that are being kept in Kentucky? Are they just still in limbo, or are they being kept?
Well,
go ahead.
I think in Kentucky, embryos aren't recognized. They haven't been given personhood.
Okay.
So right now we should be okay.
So if you're working in a lab and you accidentally dropped a petri dish that's got a embryo in it, you haven't committed murder.
Not in Kentucky.
Okay.
How about explaining a little bit about the Kentucky Reproductive Freedom Fund, how it got started, how it works, and what your goals are?
So the Kentucky Reproductive Freedom Fund is an all-volunteer nonprofit organization, and it plays an integral role in our work. Right now, we're focusing on policy reform, advocacy, education, and providing a platform for physicians and medical professionals to raise their voices against the abortion bans. And so it did get started due to relentless attacks in Kentucky For EMW, we did it for a number of reasons, and it's grown, and also it's developed into, it's different from when we initially founded the organization for the reasons that we founded it, because we've adjusted to the times and the post-Roe times. So it's funded by private donations and from private foundations across the country. We just ended a statewide campaign, which had and Ernest and Dr. Marshall and Dr. Fields were involved in our statewide campaign. We had mobile trucks that provided a message about abortion, and billboards in 5 rural areas of Kentucky. We were on several social media platforms, and we had 1.8 million impressions. We were able to place an op-ed in the Courier Journal that Dr. Fields and a medical student authored. And then we spent time making sure our voices were heard publicly by holding 3 press conferences. We held one in Frankfurt during the legislative session, and physicians, medical students, and legislators spoke there. We held a press conference in Lexington on 6/24, the 2-year anniversary of Roe. Doctors, physicians, clergy, a male ally spoke there, and our most was in Bowling Green on 8/1, which is the day that Kentuckians actually finally lost access to abortion services when one single appeals court judge overturned our temporary injunction. So we're trying to raise our voices. I mean, we'd love for more people to get involved. We need people to speak out. Our mix of speakers is usually physicians, medical students, male allies. We've had high school students speak and clergy, and we just all need to raise our voices at a much higher level.
Now, we were just talking a few minutes ago about the issue of the disconnect between the patients and the legislature in Frankfurt and the supermajorities of anti-abortion ideologues. Are you making any effort to specifically get some of these ideas into the heads of the voters so that you can get rid of some of these people? Because I don't see anything happening in Kentucky until we change the legislator, the makeup of the Kentucky legislature.
So we totally agree with you on that. It's a challenge. And one of the things that we did this year is we have a letter that is signed by now over 400 physicians and healthcare providers. We unveiled the letter last year at the Capitol with a press conference, and we provided it to every legislator via email and also a hard copy in their mailboxes at the Capitol. So once we have some additional signatures, we plan to be back at the Capitol in 2025 and do the same and re-release it. So the other thing I would comment on is that we need people to step up to run for office. We do have to put the right lawmakers in place, but in every district, county, we don't have a person that is running that will stand up for this issue. I would also comment that we have a very critical Kentucky Supreme Court race this year that will be on the ballot, and Kentucky Supreme Court justices are elected. So we need to make sure, and they're elected by district, so we need to make sure that the right person is put in place at the Kentucky Supreme Court. We lost the case at the Kentucky Supreme Court by 4-3, and putting the right person in place, if we can get a case back to the court, could make the difference to change reproductive rights and people's freedoms in Kentucky.
Well, one of the things that we mentioned, that Paul mentioned in the beginning, is this program is sponsored by Kentuckians for Single Payer. And this organization really does a very good job getting the word out to the voters, if you like. They go to the different churches and parishes. They go to the Gay Pride Festival. They went to the World Fest and have a booth at these places promoting Medicare for all. And it would seem to me that a similar effort needs to be made in dealing with these anti-abortion issues and the legislatures. So just something to think about.
We need, physicians' voices are very trusted and people listen to them. And that data also comes from the work that they did in Ohio and the progress that they've made there in protecting reproductive rights. So there is data to substantiate that. And we would call on physicians and healthcare providers to keep stepping up, raise their voices, join us at the Capitol in 2025, get involved. And I think it can make a difference. And it goes back to your question of why have physicians or healthcare providers thought about whether they could challenge these laws. So it's important to hear from physicians and healthcare providers.
Okay, we're getting down to the last 3 minutes. Now, I would like to ask each of you make a quick comment about whether if we had a single payer system like Medicare for all, how much or any difference that would make. I know the state issues are different than the national issue. And then, Ona, I was going to give you the opportunity to make your request again for a participant to do this lawsuit. So, again, very quick, if you could each one of you make a very quick comment about whether Medicare for all makes any difference at all to some of the issues we're dealing with, and then Ona will give you the last word to make your appeal.
Yeah, I think Medicare for all would be great. That would mean that all women would be covered, and all women will have reproductive services available. So it would be important to make sure that in Medicare for all, reproductive services are covered, including contraceptive care, IVF, and abortion care.
Dr. Fields?
Yeah, all of this is this issue, which just means that every individual should have the right to parent when and if they choose. That means access to healthcare. That means access to abortion care, adoption, infertility, pregnancy care, and everyone should have that regardless of their ability to pay.
Great, thank you.
Can I ask you a question, Dr. Fields? Most people don't know, but you're in a rural community and you're surrounded by some counties with rather severe poverty, and you have a for-profit hospital. So what do you do if you have a patient comes in with no insurance and requires care?
Yeah, this is the challenge, but it's one of the reasons why I'm really grateful that I work for a federally qualified health center. So, all patients can be seen at my clinic and receive prenatal care. They have sliding scale fees regardless of insurance or immigration status. But then yes, when it comes to needing care in the hospital, unfortunately, they're a little bit on their own. They have to go through the hospital's like financial counseling and apply for any sort of coverage.
Okay, Una, last word, and then Paul's going to take us out.
Great, thank you. So the Kentucky Supreme Court has left us in a situation, the legal path forward to restore abortion access in Kentucky, as they require a patient plaintiff to bring forward a case. So since this decision to potentially restore abortion access in the state, the ACLU has been looking for a Kentuckian who's pregnant and seeking an abortion, who's willing to anonymously act as the patient plaintiff in a case. If you're currently pregnant in Kentucky and seeking an abortion and would like information on bringing a lawsuit in the state, you can confidentially speak with an attorney, call or text 617-297-7012.
Well, thank you all again. This was really a great program, and this was really an important issue at a really important time. Paul?
Well, I'd like to also thank you guys for participating. This is a subject that obviously is very controversial, and it's very hard for you to have a voice on the news networks, the major news networks. So that's one of the benefits of our public access radio stations. You really get a chance to get the word out. We only wish we could increase our listenership, and but these things do find their way out to podcasts everywhere. So thank you again for some very good work here, and I appreciate it so much. So I guess this is Single Payer Radio signing off, and thanks again to Mike and Gene for putting on this program, locating the guest, and getting them to the forefront to spread their message. So tune in next time for Single Payer Radio. Thank you.